The administration has a word for this economy: golden, golden age, a new era of prosperity. And in this hearing, a congressman decides to test that single word against the receipts. And Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent never recovers. It starts almost politely. The member says he searched his whole district and couldn't find a single constituent who thinks the economy is golden. Then he loads the gun. Electricity, up. Health insurance, up 26%. Childcare, up. Gas, up nearly 50%. Groceries, still crushing family budgets. After each one, the same three words land like a hammer. That's not golden. That's not golden. That's not golden.
Health insurance costs are up 26%. That's not golden. Child care costs are up 9%. That's not golden. Gas prices are up nearly 50%. That's not golden. Grocery prices are still straining family budgets. That's not golden. Mr. Secretary, working families don't feel like they're living through a golden age.
And when Bessent tries to dictate how he'll answer, the congressman shuts the door. It's my time, Mr. Secretary, and this one's rhetorical, so you don't even have to try to talk over me. But the prices are just the warm-up, because the real bomb is hiding in a tax settlement almost nobody is talking about. The member lays it out cold. A deal, he says, that blocks the IRS from raising any claim against the president on any return filed before a certain date. And then he walks Bessent through a scenario so brazen it sounds invented. What happens if the president simply files an amendment days before the deadline and claims the government owes him $10 billion he forgot to take? Would the Treasury Secretary just pay it? No questions asked?
Is it your opinion that the settlement agreement signed by Todd Blanche, the acting attorney general and President Trump's former personal attorney, would require you to pay President Trump $1 billion, no questions asked?
We will follow Justice Department's advice.
Okay, you won't answer that either.
Watch Bessent refuse to answer. Twice. Watch him retreat to growth numbers and the Justice Department. And watch the congressman close with the line that frames the whole thing, that the president directed the deal, holds a get-out-of-jail-free card, and the man across the table has to sit there and watch while he robs the American people blind. Cost of living on one side, a self-enrichment machine on the other, and a secretary who, by the end, won't say a word. Let's get into it.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being with us today. You were here a year ago. You came before the committee, and you closed your testimony by saying the president's bold leadership had laid the foundation for what you called a golden age economy. More recently, you said the economy could grow by at least 3.5% this year, and that Americans would see a non-inflationary boom. Mr. Secretary, I've searched hard to find constituents in my district who believe that this economy is golden. In fact, many of them are struggling more today than they were the last time you were in front of this committee. Personal savings are shrinking, disposable income is down, and families are paying more and more for basic necessities. So I would like to ask you a couple of yes or no questions about this golden economy. Electricity bills are up 8.5%. Is that golden?
Sir, you can ask.
Yes or no?
You can ask
Yes
me a
or
question.
no?
You can't tell me how to answer it. So.
Okay, let me put it this way, Mr. Secretary, because you're obviously not here to answer questions.
I am here to answer questions.
It's my time, Mr. Secretary. It's my time. Health insurance costs are up 26%. That's not golden. Child care costs are up 9%. That's not golden. Gas prices are up nearly 50%. That's not golden. Grocery prices are still straining family budgets. That's not golden. Mr. Secretary, working families don't feel like they're living through a golden age. And while H.R. 1 may have delivered modest tax cuts for some Americans, many families are seeing those savings wiped out by higher costs everywhere they shop. Is that what this administration considers a golden age? And it's rhetorical, so you don't even have to try and talk over me. Secretary, Mr. Secretary, what should I tell my constituents when they ask about these costs? Farmers who are being hit by high costs of fuel and fertilizers, who can't get their product to market because of the war in Iran. Tell them it's golden?
You should tell them that we've had 2.6% economic growth since President Trump took office, despite the Democratic...
These farmers are pretty smart, Mr. Secretary.
Well, no, people in California, one person...
Reclaiming my time. These farmers are pretty smart, Mr. Secretary, and they're not going to fall for that line. I understand your unwillingness to testify and answer questions about details regarding the IRS settlement with the Trump administration due to ongoing litigation. But at the end of the day, your department, the Treasury Department, and specifically the IRS, is going to have to carry out its demands. And let me be very specific about what those demands are. The settlement says the IRS is prevented from raising any and all claims against the president with respect to any tax return filed before May 19th, 2026. So, Mr. Secretary, as the head of the Treasury Department, you will be in charge of carrying out the demands of this settlement. So let me present a real, true scenario for you. If on May 18th, President Trump files an amendment to his 2024 federal tax return, and the amendment says, quote, I'm owed an extra $10 billion. That's the amount he sued the IRS, that I forgot to claim on my tax return. Is it your opinion that the settlement agreement signed by Todd Blanche, the acting attorney general and President Trump's former personal attorney, would require you to pay President Trump $1 billion, no questions asked?
We will follow Justice Department's advice.
Okay, you won't answer that either. Do you think this is something that the American people should know? How can you sit here and not provide any answers to the American people?
Because I follow the law,
Because it is astonishing to me that the president didn't know about this deal before it was signed. Of course he knew about it. He directed it. So why not cash out on his get-out-of-jail-free card? As I read it, he can absolutely file an amendment to his tax return and claim a giant tax refund. And you have to sit there and watch while he robs the Treasury, and more important, while he robs the American people blind. That's as unacceptable as you refusing to answer questions posed to you by the members of this committee. I yield back.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr.
The congressman's entire strategy is built on a single rhetorical insight, that the most effective way to attack a slogan is to make the person defending it stand silently next to a wall of facts that contradict it. The administration's chosen word for the economy is golden, and rather than argue against that abstraction in the abstract, the member turns it into a refrain he can hang around each individual price increase. He opens by establishing his standing, claiming he searched his own district and could not find a single constituent who believes the economy is golden, which frames everything that follows not as a partisan talking point, but as the lived testimony of real people. Then he begins the gauntlet: electricity up 8.5%, health insurance up 26%, childcare up 9%, gas up nearly 50%, groceries still straining budgets, and after each figure he delivers the same verdict: that's not golden. The repetition is the weapon. By the third or fourth iteration, the phrase has become a drumbeat, and the cumulative effect is to make the word golden sound absurd by sheer juxtaposition with the cost of living. It is worth noting that these percentages are the members' own cited figures, presented without sourcing in the clip and in the most damaging framing, and that the administration would contest both the numbers and the implication that a president is responsible for every price in the economy. What makes the opening especially aggressive is the procedural maneuvering, which reveals the underlying battle for control of the room. When the member asks whether an 8.5% electricity increase is golden, Bessent immediately pushes back, telling him he can ask a question but cannot dictate how it gets answered. This is a legitimate objection in principle, because witnesses are not obligated to accept a yes or no frame on complex questions, and Bessent is signaling that he will not be boxed into one-word answers that strip away context. But the member counters with the reality of how these hearings actually work, insisting it is his time and that he will use it as he sees fit. And then he makes a clever tactical adjustment, recasting his remaining questions as rhetorical so that Bessent has no opening to respond at all. The line where he tells the secretary that the question is rhetorical so he does not even have to try to talk over him is doing double duty. It both denies Bessent the floor and characterizes him as someone who talks over people, which preemptively frames any attempt to respond as obstruction. This is the central tension of the segment. A member who wants to deliver an uninterrupted indictment versus a witness who wants the chance to reframe the premises, and in the structure of a 5-minute round, the member holds nearly all the cards. Bessent's one substantive attempt to defend the Golden Age claim is also instructive, because it shows the administration's actual counter-argument and why it struggles to land in this format. When finally given a sliver of space, he points to 2.5% economic growth since Trump took office and begins to blame Democrats, which is the macro-level case, that aggregate growth is healthy even if individual prices have risen. The problem is that the member has deliberately fought the battle on the terrain of household costs rather than aggregate statistics, and he exploits the mismatch immediately by invoking farmers hit by fuel and fertilizer prices who cannot get product to market because of the war in Iran. His retort that these farmers are smart and will not fall for that line reframes Bessent's growth figure as an elite abstraction disconnected from kitchen table reality. This is a recurring dynamic in economic hearings, the witness speaking in the language of GDP and the questioner speaking in the language of grocery receipts, and because voters experience the second far more directly than the first, the questioner usually wins the exchange regardless of the underlying economics. A fair accounting would note that growth and inflation are genuinely separate measures, and that Bessent's point is not nonsense, but in the theater of the moment, it reads as evasion. The hinge of the entire hearing, and the part that elevates it from a routine cost of living attack into something more serious, is the pivot to the IRS settlement. Here, the member shifts from sarcasm to a careful, almost prosecutorial construction. He acknowledges up front that Bessent has declined to discuss the settlement due to ongoing litigation, which is a real and standard reason for a witness to stay silent. But he argues that the Treasury and the IRS will ultimately have to carry out the deal regardless, so its terms are fair game. He then states his interpretation of the settlement, that it bars the IRS from raising any claim against the president on any tax return filed before a specific date, and he builds a hypothetical designed to expose what that could mean in practice. The scenario is deliberately vivid, the president filing an amendment to his 2024 return days before the deadline, claiming he is owed an enormous sum he supposedly forgot to take, and the Treasury being obligated to pay it with no ability to challenge it. He sharpens the political edge by noting that the settlement was signed by Todd Blanche, identifying him as both the acting attorney general and the president's former personal attorney, which is meant to suggest a conflict of interest baked into the deal itself. Bessent again declines, saying only that they will follow the Justice Department, and the member treats that non-answer as confirmation of his thesis. The closing is where the member ties his two halves together and reveals what he has actually been arguing all along. He moves from the specific settlement to a sweeping accusation, asserting that the president did not merely know about the deal, but directed it, and characterizing it as a get-out-of-jail-free card that lets him file for a giant refund and, in the member's words, rob the Treasury and rob the American people blind. The rhetorical architecture here is worth appreciating because the cost of living section and the settlement section are not really two separate topics. They are two halves of a single story the member is telling. that ordinary families are squeezed by rising prices while the most powerful man in the country has allegedly engineered a personal escape hatch from the very tax system those families cannot escape. The refusal to answer becomes part of the indictment rather than a separate complaint, with the member explicitly equating Bessent's silence with the unfairness of the underlying scheme. As cross-examination, it is highly effective, but intellectual honesty requires holding several caveats firmly in view, that the member's reading of the settlement is his own interpretation and not an agreed or adjudicated fact, that the $10 billion amendment is a hypothetical he constructed rather than something that has occurred, that Bessent's refusal to speculate about pending litigation is a defensible legal posture rather than necessarily an admission, and that the entire framing is one side's narrative delivered in a setting where the witness was given almost no room to contest it. What the clip captures perfectly is not a resolved question of fact, but the asymmetry of the hearing format itself, where a prepared member armed with a slogan to demolish and a scenario to dramatize can land blow after blow, while the witness, constrained by litigation and denied the floor, is left to absorb them.